Okay, friends, so I know I used this line to open an earlier video, but given where we are at the moment on the subpoena battlefront between Fulton County, Georgia District Attorney Fani Willis and old Senator Lindsey Graham, I think it's appropriate to go back to it one more time. Old Lindsey went down to Georgia. He was looking for some votes to steal. Let's talk about that, because justice matters. Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. So we have known for some time that Fulton County, Georgia District Attorney Fani Willis has been investigating Donald Trump's Georgia state election crimes. Remember the phone call? Look, just find me 11,780 votes and corruptly declare me the winner. So as part of DA Willis's criminal investigation, she subpoenaed Senator Lindsey Graham. And ever since she did, old Lindsey has been fighting it tooth and nail every step of the way. He desperately does not want to be put under oath and asked questions about Donald Trump or about his own conduct, his own phone calls with guys like Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger or the Chief Operating Officer for the Georgia Secretary of State's office, Gabriel Sterling. So Lindsey Graham filed what's called a motion to quash, fancy word, seeking to have a judge invalidate the subpoena. So first let me say that the legal arguments Lindsey Graham makes in his motion to quash the subpoena sort of range from weak to frivolous. And now DA Willis has filed her reply, her opposition to Lindsey's motion to quash the subpoena. First of all, she stomps all over his legal arguments. But second, she includes some facts in there about what Lindsey Graham did that makes it clear why the grand jury is keenly interested in the testimony of Lindsey Graham. Now, I want to quote pretty extensively from DA Willis's motion, her opposition to Lindsey's motion to quash the subpoena, because it's going to help frame the brief discussion we'll have toward the end of this video. So bear with me for a few minutes while I quote some of the juicier parts of DA Willis's opposition to Lindsey's motion to quash the subpoena. Response in opposition to material witness Senator Lindsey O. Graham's expedited motion to quash. Pursuant to the requirements of the following Georgia statute, a January 24, 2022 order was entered convening a Fulton County Special Purpose Grand Jury and authorizing it to investigate the facts and circumstances relating directly or indirectly to possible attempts to disrupt the lawful administration of the 2020 elections in the state of Georgia. A central focus of the investigation is former President Donald Trump's January 2nd, 2021 telephone call to Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, requesting that the Secretary find 11,780 votes in the former president's favor. Now, DA Willis then goes on to make clear that Lindsey Graham also had a telephone conversation with Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger and with Georgia state election official Gabriel Sterling about the Georgia state elections. And let's remember, Lindsey is not a senator from the state of Georgia. DA Willis's motion continues. As Raffensperger told CBS News in November of 2020, Senator Graham implied for us to audit the envelopes and then throw out the ballots for counties who have the highest frequency error of signatures. Now, DA Willis's motion continues, and it uses the word movant instead of the name Graham, but Lindsey Graham is the movant because he's the one who filed the motion to quash, but movant is a sort of a cumbersome, awkward word, so I'm going to use Lindsey Graham's name. Graham also repeated baseless allegations to Raffensperger of widespread voter fraud in Georgia and elsewhere, allegations that mirrored claims being publicly made by then-President Trump and persons associated with his campaign. And get this, friends. Graham has publicly characterized his telephone conversations with Raffensperger as part of his personal effort to learn how the Georgia voting process worked, and he was only acting as a United States Senator who is worried about the integrity of the electoral process, and that he was only exploring a hypothetical when he questioned Raffensperger about whether all the mail-in ballots from certain counties could be thrown out because of signature disparities. And please remember, friends, Brad Raffensperger is on records as saying, no, during those phone calls, it sounded like Senator Graham was, quote, urging me to throw out lawfully cast ballots. The motion continues. The position Graham takes now is inconsistent with his previous statements. D.A. Willis then helpfully informs the judge. Graham frequently appeared on Fox News and other outlets to spread election fraud disinformation consistent with unsubstantiated claims being made by the Trump campaign. And then D.A. Willis brings the hammer down. Graham's benign interpretation of his telephone conversations with Raffensperger and Sterling was not consistent with the two Georgia officials' interpretations that Graham implied for us to audit the envelopes and then throw out the ballots for the counties who have the highest frequency error of signatures. So make no mistake about it, friends. What D.A. Willis is saying is, no, Raffensperger and Sterling are disputing, are disagreeing with, are saying Graham's characterization of our phone conversations is untrue. The motion continues, and here is D.A. Willis sort of summing it up. Graham's public statements that he was simply making an effort to learn how the Georgia voting process worked were not consistent with his public support, encouragement, and abetting of the Trump campaign's efforts to spread almost identical misinformation about election fraud in Georgia and elsewhere. And then let me finish with this, because this is an ominous assertion by D.A. Willis. Graham's actions certainly appear interconnected with former President Trump's similar efforts to pressure Georgia election officials into finding 11,780 votes and to spread Georgia election fraud disinformation. So friends, there is no mistaking what D.A. Willis is saying about Senator Lindsey Graham's conduct. First, she's saying that there are two Georgia state election officials, Republican state election officials, Brad Raffensperger and Gabriel Sterling, who are in substance saying, no, what Graham is saying is a lie. That's not the way those phone calls unfolded. Second, D.A. Willis said that Lindsey Graham was, quote, abetting the Trump campaign's efforts to spread misinformation about election fraud in Georgia. Look, I'm a former career prosecutor. I know how important the word abetting is when it's used by a prosecutor. And third, D.A. Willis said that Lindsey Graham's actions appear, quote, interconnected, her word, interconnected, with Trump's efforts to pressure Georgia election officials to, let's call it what it is, just corruptly find 11,780 votes for Trump. You know, DA Willis said a mouthful in that motion about the conduct of Lindsey Graham. There's an old saying, them's fighting words. Maybe more appropriately here, them's indicting words. Let me finish up with this, because at the very end of DA Willis's motion opposing Lindsey Graham's motion to quash or invalidate the subpoena, she actually uses a little bit of, legal poetry or poetic legalese. I know that sounds like an oxymoron, but let me read you the last paragraph. She says, Graham asserts that his arguments show that all roads lead to quashal. Quashal is not really a word we often use, but apparently Lindsey likes the word quashal. All roads lead to quashal, but not where, as here, all Graham roads are built on the shifting sands of erroneous legal arguments, inapplicable legal principles, and citations to case law that fail to support any legal point being made. Indeed, the state submits that there's not a solid road to be found in Graham's memorandum. Rather than fantasizing about roads to quashal, Graham would be better served by consideration of Thomas Jefferson's maxim that legislators ought not to stand above the law they create, but ought generally to be bound by it, as are ordinary persons. Hear, hear, DA Willis. Let me finish up with this, friends. The real reason Lindsey Graham doesn't want to testify before a grand jury, doesn't want to be placed under oath and be held legally responsible for every word he utters, is because there's this little thing called a Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination. DA Willis just said in her motion, based on the evidence, that Lindsey Graham looked like he was urging Georgia state legislators or Georgia state election officials, to toss out lawfully cast votes. He was abetting the Trump campaign's efforts to spread lies about election fraud in Georgia, and his efforts were interconnected with Donald Trump's efforts to pressure Georgia election officials to find 11,780 votes. All of that information, inarguably, plainly, clearly, gives Lindsey Graham a Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination when he appears before the grand jury. Any competent lawyer would say, look, DA Willis just laid it out. You're in trouble, sport. You need to invoke the Fifth, plead the Fifth when you're in the grand jury. And how would it look for a sitting United States Senator when asked about a failed president's attempt to criminally retain power? How would it look for a senator to plead the Fifth, invoke his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination? That, I predict, is exactly what's motivating Lindsey Graham to make these weak and frivolous arguments, trying to avoid having to testify. And for the purists out there, you may remember some reporting a while ago that DA Willis said, whoa, we're not looking at Lindsey Graham as a target or a subject. In other words, we're not really looking to indict him. And I take her at her word. Donald Trump is the target. He's the one who's likely to be indicted in Georgia. But please keep this in mind. Just because a DA, a prosecutor, says, look, Lindsey, you're not the target. You're not the one we're seeking to indict here. That doesn't do away with that person's Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Because if Lindsey goes in there and lies, he can be charged with perjury. If he tells the truth, it looks like he's going to show himself to be part of Trump's corrupt efforts. And that information can be used against him if he doesn't plead the Fifth, both in state proceedings and by the feds, by the Department of Justice, because DOJ can, and I predict will, get its hands on, ultimately, the transcripts that are being developed before the grand jury in Georgia. So we're still moving in the right direction, friends. We are. Yes, I wish we were moving there more quickly, both in state proceedings and as far as DOJ's criminal grand jury investigation goes, right? Because they keep locking up the boots of the insurrection, but they've yet to lock up any of the suits of the insurrection. And that needs to happen pronto, because justice matters. Friends, thank you for bearing with me through this long and somewhat dense Justice Matters videos. Please stay safe, please stay tuned, and I look forward to talking with y'all again tomorrow.